My name is Serafina, and I am 28 years old. Last Christmas Eve changed everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. What started as another holiday spent serving everyone else ended with me discovering the most devastating betrayal imaginable. My father handed me that list like always, expecting his obedient daughter to play house servant while my golden boy brother relaxed. But this time, something different happened. This time, I found something hidden in our family home that shattered every assumption I had about blood being thicker than water. The aftermath destroyed relationships, revealed shocking truths, and proved that sometimes the people closest to you are capable of the cruelest deceptions. Before we dive into this family revenge drama that will leave you questioning everything about trust and loyalty, I want to connect with you amazing viewers. Drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from around the world. If this story hooks you already, smash that like button and hit subscribe because what happens next will blow your mind. Trust me, this Christmas tale gets darker and more twisted than any holiday movie you have ever seen. The morning of Christmas Eve started exactly like every other holiday in the Morrison household. Dad appeared in the kitchen at precisely 7 a.m., coffee mug in hand, wearing that familiar expression of barely concealed irritation that seemed permanently etched on his face whenever he looked at me. Without so much as a good morning, he slapped a handwritten list onto the counter next to my breakfast. "Serafina, here's what needs to happen today," he announced in that authoritative tone that brooked no argument. "Clean the entire downstairs, vacuum the living room, dust everything, prepare the Christmas dinner for 12 people, wrap all the remaining gifts, and make sure the guest bathroom is spotless before your brother Marcus arrives with his new girlfriend." I stared at the list, feeling that familiar knot of resentment tighten in my stomach. 28 years old, with a master's degree in marketing and a successful career, yet here I was being treated like the family servant every single holiday. Meanwhile, Marcus, my 30-year-old brother, would waltz in later with his latest conquest, receive praise for simply showing up, and spend the entire evening being waited on hand and foot. "What about Marcus?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Can he help with anything?" Dad shot me that look, the one that said I was being unreasonable for even asking. "Marcus works hard all year. He deserves to relax during the holidays. Besides, you know how these things work, Serafina. You have always been better at the domestic stuff." Better at domestic stuff. Translation: you are the daughter, so cooking and cleaning falls to you regardless of your education, career, or personal life. I bit my tongue, nodded, and watched him disappear into his study to watch football while I began my day of unpaid labor. The house felt suffocating as I moved through my assigned tasks. Mom had passed away 3 years ago from cancer, and since then, the family dynamics had shifted in ways that made me increasingly uncomfortable. Dad had become more demanding, more dismissive of my accomplishments, while simultaneously elevating Marcus to near sainthood status in his eyes. Every family gathering followed the same script. I worked myself exhausted while Marcus basked in parental adoration. By noon, I had finished most of the cleaning and started preparing the elaborate Christmas feast Dad expected. Turkey, ham, 3 different casseroles, homemade rolls, 2 types of stuffing, cranberry sauce from scratch, and 4 different desserts. The irony was not lost on me that I was cooking for 12 people when our actual family consisted of exactly 3 individuals, but Dad insisted on maintaining appearances for his business associates who might drop by. As I chopped vegetables for the stuffing, my mind wandered to last Christmas, when Marcus had announced his promotion to senior partner at his law firm. Dad had practically thrown a parade, calling relatives to share the good news, posting about it on social media, and treating Marcus like he had just won the Nobel Prize. When I had mentioned my own promotion to marketing director at my company, Dad had simply nodded and asked if I could make extra gravy that year. The afternoon stretched endlessly as I juggled multiple dishes, wrapped presents with elaborate bows that Dad demanded, and scrubbed bathrooms until they sparkled. Around 3 p.m., while dusting the living room mantel, I knocked over one of Mom's old photo albums that Dad kept displayed there. As I bent to pick it up, several loose photographs scattered across the hardwood floor. Most were typical family shots from years past, but one image made me freeze completely. It was a photograph of Marcus that I had never seen before, taken at what appeared to be a fancy restaurant. He was laughing, his arm around a woman I did not recognize. The strange thing was, this photo was clearly recent, based on Marcus's current hairstyle and the fact that he was wearing a watch I knew he had purchased just 6 months ago. But Marcus had been dating Jessica for over a year, and this woman was definitely not Jessica. Curious now, I flipped through more loose photos that had fallen from the album. There were several more images of Marcus with this same mystery woman, all recent, all showing them in obviously romantic situations. My stomach began churning as I realized what I was looking at. My brother, the golden child, the one Dad constantly praised for his integrity and success, was clearly having an affair. But that was not the worst discovery waiting for me. As I continued gathering the scattered photos, I found something that made my blood run cold. There, among the images of family vacations and birthday celebrations, was a photo that stopped my heart completely. It showed Marcus and Dad together at what appeared to be a business dinner, shaking hands with a man I recognized from local news reports about a major embezzlement scandal that had rocked our city 6 months ago. The man in the photo was David Kellerman, a financial advisor who had been arrested for stealing millions from his clients' retirement accounts. The timestamp on the photo showed it was taken just 2 weeks before Kellerman's arrest became public knowledge. Dad and Marcus were both smiling broadly, raising champagne glasses in what appeared to be a celebratory toast. My hand shook as I stared at the image. Why were my father and brother meeting with a man who was later exposed as a criminal? Why did they look so happy and celebratory? And most importantly, why was this photo hidden among old family pictures where no one would typically look for it? I quickly gathered all the photos and tucked them into my apron pocket, my mind racing with implications I did not want to consider. There had to be an innocent explanation. Maybe they had been meeting with Kellerman about legitimate investments before anyone knew about his illegal activities. Maybe the celebratory atmosphere was about something completely unrelated. But even as I tried to rationalize what I had seen, other memories began surfacing that took on new, darker meanings. Dad's sudden financial improvements over the past year, despite his struggling construction business. The expensive renovations he had made to the house. Marcus's rapid promotion at the law firm, which had seemed suspicious even to me at the time. The way both men had become increasingly secretive about their work, shutting down conversations whenever I asked about their professional lives. As I stood there in the living room, surrounded by the Christmas decorations I had spent hours arranging, a horrible possibility began forming in my mind. What if my father and brother were not just meeting with David Kellerman? What if they were involved in his criminal activities? What if the family I had been serving and sacrificing for all these years was built on lies, theft, and betrayal? The sound of a car in the driveway interrupted my spiraling thoughts. Through the front window, I could see Marcus's BMW pulling up, Jessica visible in the passenger seat. They were early, which meant I would have to pretend everything was normal while internally processing the earth-shattering discovery I had just made. I quickly shoved the photos deeper into my pocket and forced myself to return to the kitchen, but my hands were trembling as I stirred the gravy. Everything I thought I knew about my family was crumbling around me, and the worst part was that I had no idea how deep this rabbit hole actually went. Marcus swept into the house with his usual theatrical flair, Jessica trailing behind him like an expensive accessory. He kissed my cheek in that performative way he had perfected, the kind of gesture that looked affectionate from a distance but felt completely hollow up close. Jessica offered a polite smile and a bottle of wine that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Serafina, you outdid yourself again," Marcus said, surveying the perfectly decorated living room and breathing in the aroma of Christmas dinner. "This place looks incredible. You really have a gift for this domestic goddess thing." Domestic goddess thing. As if my efforts were some cute hobby rather than exhausting unpaid labor. I smiled tightly and accepted their coats, hanging them in the hall closet while my mind churned with the implications of those hidden photographs. Looking at Marcus now, with his perfectly styled hair and expensive suit, I found myself studying his face for signs of deception. Had he always been this good at lying, or was I just seeing clearly for the first time? Dad emerged from his study with the enthusiasm he reserved exclusively for his son's arrivals. "There's my boy. And beautiful Jessica, welcome back to our home." He embraced Marcus with genuine warmth, the kind of paternal affection I had spent decades hoping to receive myself. "Dad, you look great," Marcus said, and they launched into their typical routine of mutual admiration while Jessica and I stood by like supporting characters in their personal drama. I watched this interaction with new eyes, noticing how they seemed to communicate with subtle glances and shared smiles that excluded everyone else in the room. During dinner, I barely participated in the conversation, instead observing my family with the sharp focus of someone who had finally woken up from a long dream. Every inside joke between Dad and Marcus, every moment when they exchanged meaningful looks, every time the conversation shifted awkwardly when certain topics arose, it all felt loaded with hidden significance now. "So Marcus," Jessica said during the main course, "tell your father about that big case you closed last month. I still cannot believe how quickly you managed to resolve such a complicated legal situation." Marcus shot her a quick warning glance before recovering his composure. "Oh, that was nothing special. Just some routine corporate restructuring. Pretty boring stuff, actually." But I caught the look that passed between Marcus and Dad, a flash of something that might have been panic before they both forced casual expressions back onto their faces. Corporate restructuring. 6 months ago, Marcus had been handling mostly small-scale personal injury cases. How exactly had he become an expert in corporate law overnight? "That is so impressive though," I said innocently, deciding to test the waters. "Corporate restructuring must require such specialized knowledge. I imagine you had to work with financial advisors and investment specialists to understand all those complex transactions." Marcus's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Well, you pick things up as you go along. It is not as complicated as people make it sound." "Still, you must have had excellent mentors to guide you through your first major corporate case," I pressed, watching his face carefully. "I mean, the stakes must have been enormous. One wrong move and the whole deal could have fallen apart, costing everyone involved millions of dollars." Dad cleared his throat loudly. "Serafina, could you check on the dessert? I think I smell something burning." There was nothing burning, and we all knew it, but the message was clear. "Stop asking questions." I excused myself to the kitchen, but instead of checking on dessert, I pulled out my phone and began researching David Kellerman more thoroughly. What I found made my blood freeze. Kellerman had not been operating alone. The news articles mentioned that prosecutors suspected he had accomplices, possibly including lawyers who helped structure the fraudulent investment schemes and contractors who assisted in money laundering through construction projects. The investigation was ongoing, with authorities still seeking additional suspects who had helped facilitate the massive theft. Construction projects. Legal structuring. My father was a contractor. Marcus was a lawyer. The pieces of the puzzle were clicking into place with terrifying clarity. I scrolled through more articles, finding additional details that made my stomach clench. Kellerman's scheme had involved creating fake construction companies that existed only on paper, then routing stolen money through these shell corporations to make it appear legitimate. The fraudulent companies had all been registered by a law firm, and the construction contracts had been processed through local contractors who may or may not have known they were participating in illegal activities. May or may not have known. But based on that celebratory photograph I had found, it seemed clear that my father and brother had been fully aware of what they were doing. When I returned to the dining room, the atmosphere felt different. Marcus and Dad were speaking in lower tones, their conversation dying the moment I appeared. Jessica looked uncomfortable, as if she could sense the tension even without understanding its source. "Everything okay with the dessert?" Dad asked, his tone overly casual. "Perfect," I replied, forcing brightness into my voice. "Just needed to turn down the oven temperature a bit." The rest of dinner passed in strained politeness, with me playing the role of obedient daughter while internally planning my next moves. I needed more evidence before I could act on my suspicions. I needed to understand exactly how deep this conspiracy went and what my options were for seeking justice. After Jessica and Marcus left around 10 p.m., promising to return the next day for Christmas lunch, I helped Dad clean up the kitchen in our usual post-dinner routine. He seemed more relaxed now that the potential interrogation was over, chatting about neighborhood gossip and his plans for the upcoming week. "You know, Serafina," he said as we finished loading the dishwasher, "I hope you understand how much I appreciate everything you do for this family. I know sometimes I take it for granted, but having you here to handle all these domestic responsibilities means the world to me." Domestic responsibilities. Even his gratitude came wrapped in diminishment, reducing my contributions to the family to cooking and cleaning while ignoring my actual career and accomplishments. But I smiled and nodded, because I was beginning to formulate a plan that would require playing this role a little while longer. "Of course, Dad. Family comes first, right?" "Exactly. Family comes first." He patted my shoulder in what he probably thought was an affectionate gesture. "Blood is thicker than water, as they say. Blood is thicker than water." The irony of that phrase, coming from a man who had apparently betrayed the trust of countless innocent people, was almost overwhelming. But I managed to keep my expression neutral as I finished wiping down the counters. That night, alone in my childhood bedroom, I began researching in earnest. I learned everything I could about the Kellerman case, taking detailed notes about the investigation timeline, the amounts of money involved, and the ongoing search for accomplices. I also began formulating a plan for gathering the evidence I would need to expose my father and brother's involvement. The plan would require patience, careful documentation, and flawless execution. I would need to access financial records, gather more photographic evidence, and possibly even record conversations. It would be dangerous, especially if they suspected what I was doing, but I had reached a point where turning back was no longer an option. As I lay in bed that Christmas Eve, staring at the ceiling of the room where I had spent so many nights dreaming of earning my family's respect and approval, I realized that everything had changed. I was no longer the dutiful daughter desperately seeking validation from people who viewed me as a servant. I was someone with the power to bring justice to the victims of their crimes, and I was absolutely determined to use that power. The little girl who had spent decades trying to earn love through service was gone. In her place was a woman who understood that sometimes justice requires betraying the people who betrayed everyone else first. Tomorrow would begin the most dangerous chess game of my life, and I intended to win. Christmas morning arrived with the kind of bitter cold that makes even the most festive decorations look somehow ominous. I woke up early, before Dad, and used the quiet time to begin my investigation in earnest. The family computer was in Dad's study, a room I had always been subtly discouraged from entering without permission. But desperate times call for desperate measures. His password was embarrassingly predictable, Marcus's birthday followed by his own initials. Within minutes, I was accessing his email accounts and financial records, downloading everything onto a flash drive I had hidden in my robe pocket. What I found exceeded my worst expectations. Email chains between Dad and Marcus dating back over a year, discussing project timelines and client deliverables in language that seemed deliberately vague. Bank statements showing large, irregular deposits that coincided perfectly with the timeline of Kellerman's theft. Most damning of all, I found contracts for 3 different construction companies that I knew for certain did not exist. I had driven past their supposed business addresses, and they were all empty lots. The scope of their involvement was staggering. They had not just helped Kellerman launder stolen money, they had been instrumental in creating the entire fraudulent infrastructure that made his crimes possible. The victims were not faceless corporations but real people, retirees who had lost their life savings, families who had seen their children's college funds disappear, elderly couples who now faced poverty after trusting their financial security to a criminal network that included my own family. I was so absorbed in copying files that I almost missed the sound of Dad's footsteps in the hallway. I quickly shut down the computer, pocketed the flash drive, and was pretending to dust his bookshelf when he appeared in the doorway. "Serafina? What are you doing in here?" "Sorry, Dad. I wanted to dust your study before Marcus and Jessica arrive for Christmas lunch. I know how important it is to you that the house looks perfect. The lie came surprisingly easily, maybe because it was exactly the kind of behavior he expected from his dutiful daughter. His expression relaxed. That is very thoughtful of you. Just be careful around the computer, okay? I have important business files on there. Important business files. If only he knew how important those files would become when they were presented as evidence in a federal courtroom. The rest of Christmas morning passed in a surreal haze of gift exchanges and forced festivity. Dad gave me a set of expensive kitchen knives, for all that cooking you do, while Marcus received a luxury watch that probably cost more than my monthly salary. I smiled and expressed appropriate gratitude while internally cataloging every slight, every casual dismissal, every reminder of my secondary status in this family hierarchy. Marcus and Jessica arrived for lunch with Marcus carrying a conspicuously large gift bag. Special present for my favorite sister, he announced, which would have been more touching if I were not his only sister and if I had not recently discovered he was a criminal. Inside the bag was a tablet computer, which struck me as oddly generous until I realized it was probably stolen money paying for his sudden generosity. Everything they owned, every expensive gift they gave, every luxury they enjoyed, it was all built on the financial devastation of innocent people. During lunch, I tested the waters again, this time more carefully. Marcus, I was reading about that awful David Kellerman case in the news yesterday. Can you believe someone would steal from their own clients like that? I hope they catch everyone who was involved. Dad's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but Marcus maintained his composure better this time. Yeah, it is terrible what some people will do for money. Thank God there are honest lawyers working to make sure justice is served. Honest lawyers. The audacity was breathtaking. I heard they are still investigating, I continued innocently. Looking for accomplices who helped him move the money around. I hope they find them all and throw them in prison where they belong. Justice always prevails in the end, Marcus said, raising his wine glass in a mock toast. The truth has a way of coming out eventually. The truth has a way of coming out eventually. He had no idea how prophetic those words would become. After lunch, while Dad napped in his chair and Jessica browsed social media in the living room, Marcus cornered me in the kitchen during cleanup. His casual demeanor had shifted into something more serious, more calculating. Serafina, can I talk to you about something? His voice was lower than usual, more careful. Of course. What is on your mind? I have been thinking about your future lately. You are 28, you have a great career, but you are still living in Dad's house, spending all your free time taking care of family obligations. He paused, studying my face. Have you ever thought about maybe moving out? Starting your own life somewhere else? The suggestion felt less like brotherly concern and more like a warning. Are you trying to get rid of me, Marcus? Not get rid of you, but maybe it would be good for you to spread your wings a little. There are some great opportunities in other cities. I could even help you financially if you found something interesting in, say, Seattle or Denver. Somewhere far enough away to really start fresh. Somewhere far enough away to be out of their business. The timing of this conversation, right after my pointed questions about the Kellerman investigation, was not coincidental. That is very generous of you, but I like my job here. And I would never want to abandon Dad when he needs me. I kept my voice light, sisterly, giving no indication that I understood the real purpose of his offer. Just think about it, okay? Sometimes a change of scenery is exactly what a person needs to find their true purpose in life. True purpose in life. My true purpose, I was beginning to understand, was to ensure that my father and brother faced consequences for their crimes. But Marcus did not need to know that yet. That evening, after Marcus and Jessica left, I made a decision that would change everything. I called my college friend Rachel, who had become an investigative journalist for a major newspaper in the state capital. We had stayed in touch over the years, and I knew she specialized in financial crimes and corruption stories. Serafina. What a surprise to hear from you on Christmas. How are you doing? Rachel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to promise me complete confidentiality until I tell you otherwise. The tone of my voice must have alerted her to the seriousness of the situation. Of course. What is going on? If someone had evidence of involvement in a major financial crime, evidence that could help federal investigators recover stolen money and bring justice to the victims, what would be the best way to handle that information? There was a long pause. Serafina, are we talking hypothetically here, or do you actually have evidence of a federal crime? Let us say hypothetically for now. But if someone had that kind of evidence, what would you recommend? Well, hypothetically, that person would need to be very careful about how they proceeded. They would want to gather as much documentation as possible before approaching authorities, because once an investigation begins, the subjects become much more cautious. They would also want to consider their own safety, especially if the criminals might suspect they were being investigated. And would a journalist be able to help with that process? Hypothetically? A good journalist could definitely help ensure the evidence reached the right people and that the story was told properly. They could also provide some protection for the whistleblower by sharing the information with law enforcement simultaneously, making it harder for anyone to retaliate quietly. Rachel, what if I told you that hypothetically, this evidence involved the David Kellerman embezzlement case, and that hypothetically, I could provide documentation proving that other people helped him launder the stolen money? The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Rachel spoke, and her voice was tight with excitement and concern. Serafina, if what you are telling me is true, you are sitting on one of the biggest stories of the year. The Kellerman case has been front-page news for months, and federal prosecutors have been desperate for leads on his accomplices. But you need to understand something: if these people are capable of stealing millions of dollars, they are also capable of doing whatever it takes to protect themselves. You could be in real danger. I understand that. But Rachel, these people destroyed so many lives. Families lost everything they had worked for their entire lives. How can I just pretend I do not know what I know? You cannot, and you should not. But we need to do this right. Can you meet me tomorrow? I want to see what evidence you have, and I want to put you in touch with some people who can keep you safe while we figure out how to proceed. Yes. But Rachel, there is something else you need to know. This is not just about some random criminals I stumbled across. These are people very close to me. If we do this, if we expose them, it will destroy my family. Serafina, from what you are telling me, your family is already destroyed. It just took you until now to see it clearly. As I hung up the phone, I felt a mixture of terror and relief that I had never experienced before. The wheels were in motion now, and there would be no going back. But for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was finally doing something that mattered, something that was bigger than playing the role of dutiful daughter in a family that had never truly valued me. I was about to become the instrument of justice for people who had been robbed of their futures by the very people who had raised me. It was terrifying and exhilarating and absolutely necessary. The game had begun, and this time I intended to be the one making the rules. The next morning, I met Rachel at a small coffee shop 2 hours away from my hometown, far enough to ensure we would not accidentally encounter anyone from my family's social circle. She arrived with a federal agent named Detective Sarah Chen and a prosecutor named James Rodriguez, both of whom specialized in financial crimes cases. The gravity of the situation became real the moment I saw their serious faces and official badges. Serafina, we understand this is incredibly difficult for you, Detective Chen said gently as I handed over the flash drive containing all the evidence I had gathered. But what you are doing takes tremendous courage, and it will help bring justice to dozens of families who lost everything to this criminal enterprise. As they reviewed the documents I had copied from Dad's computer, their expressions grew increasingly grim. The prosecutor whistled softly when he saw the bank statements showing the money transfers, and Detective Chen shook her head in disgust as she read through the email chains between Dad and Marcus. This is even more extensive than we suspected, Rodriguez said finally. Your father and brother were not just accomplices to Kellerman, they were essential partners in the entire operation. Without their legal and construction expertise, he never could have moved this much money without detection. How much money are we talking about? I asked, though part of me did not want to know the answer. Based on what we can trace so far, at least $12 million passed through the shell companies your father created, with your brother providing the legal framework to make it all appear legitimate. But that is probably just the tip of the iceberg. $12 million. $12 million stolen from people who had trusted their financial advisors with their life savings, their retirement funds, their children's college money. And my family had been instrumental in making that theft possible. What happens next? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Next, you help us gather more evidence, Detective Chen explained. We need recorded conversations, additional documents, and most importantly, we need to catch them in the act of moving more money. Based on these email chains, it looks like they are planning another major transaction in the next few weeks. You want me to spy on my own family? We want you to help us catch criminals who happen to be related to you, Rodriguez corrected firmly. These people have stolen millions of dollars and destroyed dozens of lives. The fact that they share your DNA does not change the fact that they are dangerous criminals who need to be stopped. Rachel reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Serafina, I know this feels like betrayal, but think about it this way, they betrayed their victims, they betrayed the trust of their community, and they betrayed the values they claimed to teach you. You are not betraying them, you are finally standing up for what is right. They equipped me with a sophisticated recording device that looked like an ordinary smartphone case, and Detective Chen trained me on how to guide conversations toward incriminating topics without seeming suspicious. The plan was for me to return home and act completely normal while gathering evidence of their ongoing criminal activities. Remember, Detective Chen warned as we prepared to leave, if at any point you feel like they suspect what you are doing, you call us immediately and get out of that house. These people have too much to lose to go quietly, and family relationships will not protect you if they think you are a threat to their freedom. The drive home felt like traveling toward my own execution. Every mile brought me closer to a confrontation I could not avoid, a moment when I would have to choose definitively between the family that had raised me and the justice that their victims deserved. When I arrived home, Dad was in his study making phone calls, and I could hear him discussing project timelines and delivery schedules in the same coded language I had seen in his emails. I positioned myself in the hallway where the recording device could pick up his voice clearly. No, we cannot move that much at once, he was saying. It has to be spread out over several weeks to avoid detection. Marcus says the legal paperwork will be ready by Friday, so we can start the first transfer then. First transfer. They were planning to steal more money, which meant more families would lose their savings if I did not act quickly. That evening, Marcus came over for what he claimed was a casual family dinner, but I could tell from the tension in his voice that this was actually a business meeting. They sent me to the kitchen to prepare food, clearly expecting me to stay out of their conversation, but the recording device picked up everything they said in the dining room. The heat is getting too intense, Marcus was saying. The feds are asking too many questions about the Kellerman case, and some of our shell companies are getting scrutinized. Maybe we should consider shutting down operations for a while. Absolutely not, Dad replied firmly. We have 3 more major transfers scheduled for this month. That is nearly $2 million we would be walking away from. The heat will die down eventually, but this opportunity will not wait. What if they trace the money back to us? They will not. We have been too careful, and our documentation is perfect. Besides, even if something goes wrong, we have enough money hidden offshore to disappear if necessary. Disappear if necessary. They had contingency plans for fleeing the country if their crimes were discovered. How long had they been planning this? How many victims had they already claimed? What about Serafina? Marcus asked, and my blood ran cold. She has been asking a lot of questions lately about financial crimes and investigations. Do you think she suspects anything? Serafina? Dad laughed dismissively. She is too focused on playing house and trying to earn our approval to notice anything important. Besides, even if she did suspect something, she would never have the courage to act against her own family. She is too dependent on us emotionally. Too dependent on them emotionally. Too focused on earning their approval. The casual cruelty of their assessment hit me like a physical blow, but it also crystallized my resolve. They saw me as weak, pathetic, and controllable, which meant they would never see my rebellion coming. Still, Marcus said, maybe we should consider my suggestion about helping her move to another city. Get her out of the house while we finish up these last few transactions. If it makes you feel better, we can revisit that conversation after the first of the year. But I really think you are worrying about nothing. After Marcus left, I sat in my room reviewing the recordings and feeling a mixture of heartbreak and determination. Their dismissive attitude toward me was actually an advantage. They would never suspect that the daughter they viewed as weak and dependent was about to bring their entire criminal enterprise crashing down around them. But I also felt a profound sadness for the family I had thought I belonged to. These were the people who had raised me, who had been present for every birthday and holiday, who had taught me to ride a bike and helped me with homework. How had I been so blind to their true nature for so long? The answer, I realized, was that I had spent my entire life trying to earn love from people who were incapable of genuine love. They saw relationships as transactions, family as a source of labor and loyalty, and other people as resources to be exploited. I had been trying to win a game that was rigged from the beginning. The next morning, I called Detective Chan and reported everything I had recorded. Within hours, she and her team were finalizing plans for a coordinated takedown that would happen when Dad and Marcus attempted their next money transfer. You did incredible work, Serafina, she told me over the phone. We have enough evidence now to not only arrest your father and brother, but to seize their assets and begin recovering money for the victims. You should be proud of what you have accomplished. Proud. I was not sure pride was the right word for what I felt. I was satisfied that justice would be served, relieved that their crime spree would end, and determined to see it through to completion. But I was also mourning the death of my illusions about family and love and belonging. When will you arrest them? I asked. Tomorrow morning, when they meet to finalize the paperwork for their next transfer. We will have teams positioned at both locations, your father's office and your brother's law firm. We want to take them simultaneously so neither has a chance to warn the other or destroy evidence. Tomorrow morning. In less than 24 hours, the only family I had ever known would be in federal custody, facing decades in prison for their crimes. I would be alone in the world, but for the first time in my adult life, I would also be free from their manipulation and control. What about me? What happens to me after they are arrested? That depends on what you want to happen. We can arrange for you to relocate if you are worried about harassment from their associates. We can also connect you with victim services if you need counseling or financial assistance. But honestly, Serafina, you are stronger than you realize. You just brought down a major criminal conspiracy. I think you can handle whatever comes next. As I hung up the phone, I realized she was right. I was stronger than I had ever imagined possible. Tomorrow would bring the end of one chapter of my life and the beginning of another, and for the first time, I was the one writing the story. The morning of the arrests dawned gray and cold, perfectly matching the somber mood that had settled over me like a heavy blanket. I sat in my kitchen, pretending to read the newspaper while actually watching the clock and waiting for the phone call that would tell me it was over. Dad left the house at 8:30 a.m., kissing my forehead and reminding me to pick up his dry cleaning later. Have a good day, sweetheart, he said, the same casual affection he had shown me every morning of my life. In 3 hours, he would be in handcuffs. The call came at 11:47 a.m. Detective Chen's voice was calm but victorious. We have them both in custody. Your father was arrested at his office while signing documents for a fraudulent construction contract worth $800,000. Marcus was taken into custody at his law firm while transferring money to an offshore account. They are both being processed now. I sat in stunned silence for a moment, trying to process that it was really over. Did they say anything about me? Your father asked if you knew about the investigation. When we told him you were the one who provided the evidence, he became very quiet. Marcus had a more colorful reaction. But Serafina, you should know that we also arrested 3 other people this morning: Kellerman's original accountant, a bank manager who was facilitating the transfers, and another lawyer who was helping create false documentation. You did not just stop your family, you helped us roll up an entire criminal network. An entire criminal network. The scope of what they had been involved in was still hard to comprehend. How many people had they hurt? How many families had lost everything because of their greed? What happens now? Now we begin the process of asset recovery and victim compensation. Your father and brother will be formally charged this afternoon, and their lawyers will probably seek bail hearings within the next few days. But given the severity of the charges and the flight risk they represent, I doubt they will be released before trial. And the evidence I provided will be crucial to securing convictions. We expect both men to be sentenced to significant prison time, probably 15 to 20 years each, assuming they do not cooperate with investigators to reduce their sentences. 15 to 20 years. My father and brother would spend the next 2 decades in federal prison, assuming they lived that long. The family I had known was gone forever, destroyed by their own criminal choices and my decision to seek justice for their victims. After hanging up with Detective Chen, I sat alone in the house that had been my prison for so many years, trying to figure out what I was supposed to feel. Relief? Sadness? Anger? Instead, I felt strangely numb, as if my emotional processing system had simply shut down from overload. The numbness lasted until the local news began reporting the story that evening. Seeing my father and brother's arrest photos on television made the reality hit me like a physical blow. These were the people who had raised me, who had been constants in my life for 28 years, and now they were being described as alleged co-conspirators in a major embezzlement scheme and suspected money launderers. The phone started ringing almost immediately. Neighbors wanting to know if I had known about their criminal activities. Reporters asking for comments about my family's arrests. Former colleagues of Dad and Marcus seeking information about whether their own business dealings might be affected. I did not answer any of the calls. By the 3rd day after the arrests, the media attention had become overwhelming. News vans parked outside the house, reporters camping on the front lawn, neighbors being interviewed about their shock at discovering they had been living near such notorious criminals. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, trapped by the attention I had never wanted. That evening, Marcus's girlfriend Jessica called, and something made me decide to answer the phone. Serafina, I just wanted you to know how sorry I am about everything that has happened, she said, her voice thick with tears. I had no idea about any of this. Marcus never told me anything about his business dealings beyond the normal legal work. Jessica, can I ask you something? The night we had dinner on Christmas Eve, when I was asking questions about corporate restructuring, did you notice how nervous Marcus got? Yes, actually. He was very quiet after you all went home that night. He kept saying something about how you were asking too many questions and maybe Dad was right about encouraging you to move away. But I thought he was just being paranoid. Encouraging me to move away. Even Jessica had known that they wanted me out of the picture, though she had not understood why. Jessica, there is something I need to tell you, and I want you to hear it from me rather than from the newspapers or the prosecution. I took a deep breath. I was the one who provided the evidence that led to their arrests. I discovered what they were doing, and I turned them in to the authorities. The silence stretched so long I thought she had hung up. Finally, she spoke, and her voice was filled with a mixture of shock and something that might have been respect. You turned in your own family? I turned in criminals who happened to be my family. There is a difference. Serafina, do you have any idea how much courage that took? Most people would have just looked the other way or convinced themselves it was not their problem. Most people do not have to live with the knowledge that their family destroyed dozens of innocent lives for money. Still, I cannot imagine how difficult that decision must have been. I hope you know that you did the right thing. After Jessica hung up, I realized that her words had touched on something important. I had done the right thing, regardless of the personal cost. For the first time in my life, I had chosen justice over family loyalty, truth over comfortable lies, and the welfare of strangers over my own emotional security. The next morning brought a call from Rachel, who had been coordinating with federal prosecutors to ensure the story was reported accurately and completely. Serafina, I wanted to give you a heads up about something. The prosecution is planning to release a statement this afternoon about the scope of the investigation and the amount of money they expect to recover for victims. Your cooperation is going to be mentioned prominently, which means your name will probably become public knowledge. My name becoming public knowledge. That meant the end of any anonymity I had managed to maintain, the end of any possibility of quietly rebuilding my life without constant reminders of this situation. Are you ready for that level of attention? I do not think anyone is ever ready for their private family drama to become national news. But I knew this was a possibility when I made the decision to come forward. There is something else. Several of the victims' families have reached out through their lawyers to express their gratitude for your courage in exposing this crime. One elderly couple lost their entire retirement savings to this scheme, and they wanted me to tell you that your actions probably saved them from losing their house as well. An elderly couple who might have lost their house. Real people with real faces and real lives that had been destroyed by my family's greed. That was what made all of this worthwhile, knowing that my decision had helped prevent even more suffering. That afternoon, as promised, the prosecution held a press conference announcing the scope of the investigation and the expected recovery of stolen funds. My name was indeed mentioned as a courageous family member who chose to stand with the victims rather than protect the criminals. Within hours, the story had been picked up by national news outlets, and my phone was ringing constantly with interview requests. I declined them all, but I did agree to meet with a victim advocacy group that wanted to thank me personally for my actions. The meeting was held at a community center downtown, and when I walked into the room, I was overwhelmed by the number of people who had come to express their appreciation. There were elderly couples, young families, single mothers, and middle-aged professionals, all united by the fact that my father and brother had helped steal their money. An elderly man named Harold spoke for the group. Miss Serafina, we know that what you did could not have been easy. Turning in your own family takes a kind of courage that most people never have to find. But because of your actions, we have hope that we might recover at least some of what we lost, and we know that these criminals will not be able to hurt anyone else. As I looked around the room at all those faces, all those lives that had been damaged by people I had loved and trusted, I finally understood the full weight of what I had done. This was not just about family drama or personal betrayal. This was about justice for people who had done nothing wrong except trust the wrong financial advisor. I want you all to know, I said, standing to address the group, that I am not a hero. I am just someone who could not live with the knowledge that my family was destroying innocent lives for money. You deserved better from the people who were supposed to protect your financial security, and I am sorry it took so long for someone to speak up. As I left that meeting, I realized that the worst was probably behind me now. Dad and Marcus were in custody, the evidence was in the hands of prosecutors, and the victims had hope for some measure of justice. The family I had known was gone forever, but maybe that was not such a terrible thing after all. Maybe it was time to build a new life based on my own values rather than trying to earn approval from people who were incapable of genuine love. Maybe it was time to discover who I could become when I was not playing the role of dutiful daughter to criminals. 6 months later, I stood in a federal courtroom watching my father and brother receive their sentences. Dad got 22 years for money laundering, conspiracy, and fraud. Marcus received 19 years for the same charges plus additional time for his role in creating the legal framework that made the entire scheme possible. As the judge read their sentences, I felt a complex mixture of sadness and satisfaction. These were still the people who had raised me, who had been present for every milestone of my childhood, but they were also criminals who had destroyed dozens of lives for personal gain. Justice required that they face consequences for their choices, even if those consequences broke my heart. Dad looked older than his 58 years as he was led away in handcuffs. Marcus maintained his composure until the moment the bailiff approached him, and then his mask finally slipped, revealing the fear and regret he had been hiding throughout the trial. Neither of them looked in my direction as they were escorted from the courtroom. In the months leading up to the trial, I had received dozens of letters from them, alternating between apologies and accusations. Dad's letters focused on disappointment and betrayal. "How could you destroy your own family for strangers?" Marcus's letters were more manipulative, attempting to convince me that I had misunderstood their actions and that they had planned to return the money eventually. I did not respond to any of the letters. There was nothing left to say to people who still could not acknowledge the full scope of the harm they had caused. The trial itself had been a media circus, with news outlets describing it as one of the largest financial fraud cases in the state's history. The total amount stolen was ultimately determined to be over $18 million, affecting 63 families across multiple states. The prosecution was able to recover approximately 70% of the stolen money, which meant most victims would receive at least partial compensation for their losses. During my testimony, I had to describe finding those initial photographs, my investigation into their criminal activities, and my decision to contact federal authorities. The defense attorneys for both Dad and Marcus had attempted to portray me as a vindictive daughter seeking revenge for years of feeling unappreciated, but the evidence I had provided was too comprehensive and damaging for their character assassination attempts to be effective. "Miss Morrison," the prosecutor had asked during my testimony, "what ultimately motivated you to report your family's criminal activities to law enforcement?" "The realization that my personal loyalty to my father and brother was causing continued harm to innocent people who deserved justice," I had replied. Family relationships cannot be used as shields to protect criminals from the consequences of their actions. Now, with the trial concluded and sentences imposed, I was finally free to begin rebuilding my life according to my own values rather than the expectations of people who had never truly valued me. The first major change was leaving my hometown entirely. The media attention and constant reminders of the trial had made it impossible to move forward while remaining in the same community where everyone knew my story. I accepted a marketing position with a nonprofit organization in Portland, Oregon, focusing on financial literacy education for vulnerable populations. The irony of helping people protect themselves from financial predators was not lost on me, but it felt like appropriate penance for the years I had spent unknowingly benefiting from my family's criminal activities. Every workshop I conducted, every elderly person I taught to recognize investment scams, every family I helped understand their financial options, it felt like a small step toward balancing the scales of justice. Rachel had remained a constant source of support throughout the ordeal, and our friendship had deepened into something that felt more like sisterhood. She helped me find an apartment in Portland, connected me with a therapist who specialized in family trauma, and checked on me regularly during the difficult early months of rebuilding my life. "You know," she told me during one of our regular phone conversations, "I have been thinking about something you said during the trial. About family relationships not being shields for criminal behavior. I think that principle applies to more than just criminal activity." "What do you mean?" "I mean that family relationships also should not be shields for emotional abuse, manipulation, or toxic behavior. Just because someone is related to you by blood does not mean you owe them unlimited loyalty if they are harming you or other people." She was right, and that realization had been one of the most liberating aspects of this entire experience. For 28 years, I had accepted treatment that I would never have tolerated from friends, colleagues, or romantic partners, simply because the people mistreating me happened to be family members. I had confused loyalty with enabling, love with servitude, and family obligation with self-sacrifice. The therapy sessions were crucial in helping me understand these patterns and develop healthier relationship boundaries. Dr. Martinez, my therapist, specialized in helping people recover from family trauma and manipulation. Serafina, you spent your entire adult life trying to earn love from people who were emotionally incapable of providing it, she explained during one session. Your father and brother saw relationships as transactions, you provide services, they provide conditional approval. But that is not love, and it is not family in any meaningful sense. Then what is family supposed to look like? Family, whether biological or chosen, should be characterized by mutual respect, genuine affection, and support that is not contingent on your usefulness to other people. Real family members celebrate your successes, comfort you during failures, and value you for who you are rather than what you can do for them. Chosen family. That concept became central to my healing process and my new life philosophy. Over the following months, I began building relationships with people who valued me for my intelligence, my integrity, and my capacity for loyalty, not my willingness to serve their needs without question. My colleagues at the nonprofit became genuine friends who appreciated my work ethic and professional skills. My neighbors in Portland were kind, interesting people who knew nothing about my past and judged me only on my present actions. I joined a hiking group, took cooking classes, and volunteered at a local animal shelter, building a social network based on shared interests and mutual respect. 1 year after the trial, I received a letter from Harold, the elderly man who had spoken for the victim advocacy group. He wrote to tell me that he and his wife had been able to keep their house thanks to the money recovered through asset forfeiture, and that they were finally sleeping peacefully again knowing that the people who had stolen from them were in prison. Miss Morrison, his letter concluded, you gave us back our faith in justice and in the possibility that good people still exist in the world. We pray that you have found peace and happiness in your new life, and we want you to know that you will always have our gratitude and our friendship if you ever need it. That letter meant more to me than any approval I had ever received from Dad or Marcus. Harold and his wife barely knew me, but their gratitude was genuine and unconditional, based on actions that had required courage rather than servitude. As I approached the second anniversary of that Christmas Eve discovery, I realized that losing my biological family had actually freed me to find my true family, people who loved and respected me for who I am rather than what I can do for them. I also realized that the little girl who had spent decades trying to earn love through service was finally gone, replaced by a woman who understood her own worth and refused to accept anything less than genuine respect and affection from the people in her life. The house in my hometown sold quickly after Dad and Marcus's convictions, with the proceeds going toward victim compensation as part of their court-ordered restitution. I kept only a few items with genuine sentimental value, photos of my mother, some jewelry that had belonged to my grandmother, and a few books from my childhood. Everything else, all the material reminders of my old life, was sold or donated. I did not need physical objects to remember the lessons I had learned about loyalty, justice, and the difference between family that is given to you and family that you choose. Standing in my new apartment in Portland, surrounded by furniture I had chosen, books I enjoyed reading, and photographs of friends who genuinely cared about me, I felt something I had never experienced before, complete contentment with my own life choices. I had lost a family, but I had gained integrity, self-respect, and the knowledge that I was capable of doing the right thing even when it required enormous personal sacrifice. I had learned that blood is not thicker than water when that blood is poisoned by greed, manipulation, and criminal behavior. Most importantly, I had learned that family is not about biology or obligation, it is about love, respect, and mutual support between people who choose to be in each other's lives. So let me ask you something that has been on my mind as I have shared this story with you. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where family loyalty conflicted with your moral principles? Have you had to choose between protecting people you love and standing up for what you know is right? I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below, because I think we all struggle with these questions at some point in our lives. If this story resonated with you or made you think about your own family relationships in a new way, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more stories about life lessons learned the hard way. Share this video with someone who might benefit from hearing about the difference between toxic loyalty and healthy family bonds. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of this community where we can discuss the complicated realities of family, justice, and personal growth. I hope that whatever challenges you are facing in your own family relationships, you remember that you deserve to be valued and respected for who you are, not just what you can do for other people. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable harmful behavior, even when that behavior comes from people you care about. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next video.